Hello students, welcome to Keto Institute. So today we are going to continue our chapter number 4 of class 12 polity, which is your international organization. So till now we have already covered a major chunk about the United Nations, which is the most important international organization constituting about 193 countries as a member, right? So today in this class we are going to discuss about some reforms of the structures and processes of the United Nations. We have already discussed about the structure of the United Nations. We have already talked about five major bodies that constitute the United Nations, in which we have already talked about United Nations General Assembly. Then we had discussed about the United Nations Security Council, and other than that we have three other bodies as well. So you can go to the previous lectures if you have not covered it yet. So today we are going to talk about the structural changes that were basically demanded by few countries, and we will see how the reforms have been criticized by other countries, definitely the western world or the countries who were at an advantage due to the previous structure, how these western countries would have criticized the reforms in the structure of the United Nations, right? So basically the case of the reform of the UN was getting a widespread support. Basically all the countries that were a part of United Nations or that are a part of United Nations have been demanding a change in the structure, right? Getting agreement on what to do is difficult, but it is really difficult to agree upon a single point, like what kind of changes do we really want in the United Nations. So there was a debate in the United Nations Security Council, right? Because we have already discussed that in the Security Council there are five permanent members who have this veto power, right? If you don't know what veto power is, then I would suggest you to go back to the previous lectures, okay? But still I'll try to give you a gist about the veto power. So basically in the United Nations Security Council there are five permanent members, which is your UK, US, France, China, and your Russia. So these were the some major economies of the world at that time. So they were a part of the Security Council, or we can say these were a part of the permanent member, right? So they all were the permanent member. We have discussed in the Security Council there are 15 members, in which 5 were permanent and 10 were your non-permanent members, general members. Okay, so these 5 permanent members have this veto power. Now what is this veto power? So veto power simply means that if you don't agree on a particular topic, then you can simply reject that bill or that particular agreement, right? And then that bill would not be passed because you have used your veto power. So ultimately I'm trying to say that if any of these country would disagree upon a particular point, then simply that bill would not be passed by the entire United Nations. So somewhere we can see that this is the discretionary power that has been given to these five permanent members. Okay, at that particular time it would have been okay to give a particular power to these permanent members, because they were eventually representing the powerful economic countries. But now the situation have already been changed, right? So the Security Council, as of now, it is no longer representing the today's political reality. Right now we have so many other countries that are becoming a major part of the international trade and other political entities, right? So the Security Council does not represent the contemporary political realities. There are so many other countries who are as powerful as China, maybe. Let's say India is one of the big example. India is doing great at the international level. So why not India is becoming a permanent member, right? So in 1992, the United Nations General Assembly, this General Assembly in which almost all countries are the member, so the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution, right? And the resolution reflected these three main complaints. First one was about the Security Council and its permanent membership. Now the second one was that the decisions that are taken by the United Nations usually represent the Western values and the interests, because usually whatever decision was taken by the United Nations, it had a particular dominance of the Western countries, right? So it was dominated by few powers and other countries were more or less neglected. Third one is it lacks equitable representation. Now, why we are saying it lacks equitable representation? So that means not all the countries were equally represented in the United Nations. If you can say even the continents were not equally represented in the United Nations. For example, you can see that there are two countries from the European nation. See, there is UK, there is France, right? And Russia comes under two continents, European as well as Asian. So we can say there were around three countries from the European nation, but we can see no country from from Africa, right? So we can say Africa is not represented in this Security Council. So that's why we can say it lacks equitable representation. Now, in view of these growing demands, so definitely all the countries were demanding that there is a need of the restructuring of the United Nations. So finally, on 1st January 1997, the General Secretary, the UN Secretary General, who was Kofi Annan, we have talked about him in the previous lectures. So Kofi Annan finally initiated an inquiry into how the UN should be reformed. So he basically set up an inquiry to see like what kind of changes can be introduced in the Security Council, and for instance, should new Security Council be members be chosen. So basically, they just wanted to know on what basis. We cannot make each and every country a member of the Security Council. If we have to add new members in the Security Council, then there must be some kind of points that needs to be fulfilled by every country to be a member of that. There has to be some eligibility criteria, right? So in the years since then, the following are the just some of the criteria. So basically, these were some of the few criteria that were laid by the committee that was set up by Kofi Annan. Okay, in which year? So it was set up in 1997, right? So let's see quickly what are these criteria that a country must fulfill in order to be a part of the Security Council, right? Firstly, it has to be a major economic power, right? The country must be doing good in the economic terms. Secondly, it must have a major military power, right? That means the defense of that country should be, defense system should be very strong. Second, a substantial contributor to the UN budget. Now we all know UN is made up by its country members, right? So how does the UN works? Who will gonna pay the salary of the people who are working here in the United Nations? That is the contributed funding. All the member countries of the United Nations give some funding to the United Nations so that it can run properly as an organization. So, right? So in order to become a member, a permanent member of the Security Council, you must be a good contributor to the UN budget. You must be contributing to the United Nations budget, right? Next, a big nation in terms of population. Of course, there has to be a good amount of population to be a part of Security Council. Next, a nation that represents democracy and human rights. Of course, we can't include a country who is running on dictatorship, right? A country that could make the council more representative of the world's diversity in terms of geography, economic system, and culture. So basically, a country that would be able to represent the United Nations in all the different terms, like for example, from geography, from economy to culture, right? Now we can see clearly that these criteria have some validity, right? But the problem was that these particular points were not clearly told. Like if we are saying a major economic power, then how much a country should how much economy, what exact amount of economy should a country have in order to be a member of the Security Council, a major military member. But what kind of a military power? Are you talking about nuclear weapons? Are you talking about some missiles? Are you talking about submarines? What exactly you are talking about? And what is the number of those weapons if you are clearly stating that as well? How much a country should be a substantial contributor, but how much it should contribute to the UN budget in order to be a member, right? So these things are not particularly clarified by the committee, right? Let's read out. Governments saw advantage in some criteria and disadvantage in other depending on their interest and aspirations. So definitely a country who would have a big population, so it would say yes, this point is very good. A country must have a big population in order to be a member. But let's say the same country does not have a democratic system. So definitely the country would criticize, okay, no, democracy should not be the only condition, right? So that's how the countries were interpreting all these points according to their own aspirations and interests, even if they had no desire to be a member themselves. Let's say कि if a country does not fulfill any of these criteria and they are themselves not interested in becoming a member nation of Security Council, but definitely they would try to judge so that their neighboring country could not become a member. Let's say Pakistan. Definitely Pakistan cannot think of becoming a permanent member, but definitely Pakistan will still comment. Why? Because it doesn't want India to become a member of the Security Council, right? So that was the issue. How big an economic or military power? I've just explained it. The committee has not clarified like how much economy or military it is talking about, what exact quantity or quality it is talking about, and how much one has to contribute in the budget. Exactly, the amount has not been mentioned. Was a big population an asset or a liability for a country trying to play a bigger role in the world? So definitely, if you're talking about population, then it certainly means that the country would be so much engrossed in its own affairs that a country would not be able to solve the greater issues at the world level if the country is busy in dealing with its own population, right? So that is also not mentioned. If respect for democracy and human rights was the criteria, countries with excellent records would be in the line to be members, but would they be effective as council members? So of course, there are so many countries that have adopted democracy, that are working on the democratic model, but do you think it would be effective as the council members? Definitely not. Okay. Furthermore, how was the matter of representation to be resolved? So finally, how was this matter would be resolved about the representation? Like I just explained you, कि the country who is trying to becoming a member of the Security Council, it must be properly representing the entire world, be it your geography, be it your culture. So that was not again clarified. Did equitable representation in geographical terms means that there should be one seat each for Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean? So if you are saying there should be proper representation or equitable representation, so does that mean that from every continent there should be one country? But if that is true, then already two or three countries from the European subcontinents are a part of Security Council, right? And from Latin America there is no one, right? And let's say if you are talking about Asia also, so again from Asia we have already Russia and China. Russia and China, then there are already two members from Asia. What about other big countries like India, right? So you need to clarify all these points as well, right? Should the representation on the other hand be by the regions or the sub-regions rather than continents? So again, if you are not talking about continents, then do you want the equitable representation from the regions, right? Why should the issue of equitable representation be decided to geography? And now why geography is particularly concerned? Why not by levels of economic development? Why you are not considering the economic these are all the issues. Like you have simply stated this has to be the criteria, but you need to have the you need to give the exact understanding of what you are trying to see in a particular country, okay, to give the membership of the Security Council. Why not, in other words, give more seats to members of the developing world? Why you are not giving some seats to the developing world? Because eventually the world has been divided into two particular parts, the developed and the developing one. So already the developed countries are represented in the Security Council. Now there is no representation of the developing world, so why not simply consider the developing world, right? Even here there are difficulties. The developing world consists of countries at many different levels. Now again, if we are considering the developing nations, let's say we have already developed countries, now let's add on the developing countries. Now in developing countries also you would see there are so many countries that are at a different level of their developing, right? One country would be at a good level, or one is had just begin to develop. So how will you consider it? And lastly, if you're talking about culture, so what do you really mean by culture? By culture, are you talking about the civilization? What exactly are you talking about, right? How does one divide the world by civilization or culture, given that nations have so many cultural streams within their borders? Now even if you are talking about culture, let's say India में तो within India also there are so many there is so much cultural diversity. How can you consider culture then? जहाँ एक border के अंदर ही there are so many cultural streams within a country, then how can you consider culture, right? So a related issue was to change the nature of the membership altogether. So finally a solution came out that we have to change this nature of membership altogether. Some instead, for instance, that the veto power of the five permanent, because you know Why these countries are crying over becoming the permanent member? Why they really want to become the permanent member? They want to become the permanent member because after becoming a permanent member they will get this veto power and that respect in the nation, that big daddy respect, right? So the country said कि इतना सब conflict चल रहा है, let's remove this entire provision altogether. There should be no permanent member, there should be no veto power given to any of the, right? So many people perceive that it is the veto power due to which every conflict is being arise. So what can we do? So this veto power is no longer right or relevant, so remove this altogether. Just remove this entire concept of veto power and the matter will be solved, right? But again the problem was that in the Security Council there are 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent members. I have already explained you in the Security Council 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent. These 5 are veto power, right? Now these 5 permanent members are at a privileged position, right? And they are a part of the United Nations just because they have this veto power. Just imagine why would a country like USA would be a member of such an international organization. Does USA need any other country? They are self-sufficient. They can do anything on their own. They don't require any grouping or any alliance, right? The only purpose, the only reason they are a part of the UN is because of this veto power, because they see themselves as a dominant country, right? Now, if we are gonna remove this provision of the veto power, then USA will back out. Why would USA invest so much in the United Nations when it will be of no use to USA itself, right? So US, after the backout of USA from the United Nations, this entire organization would be collapsed because the major power of this entire world is US. When USA is no longer a member of the United Nations, what is the purpose of this organization then? Right? So that is also the problem. Now after the Second World War there has to be a stability in the world, right? The privilege that were given to these 5 permanent members are permanency and veto power, right? And the non-permanent members can serve for only 2 years at a time and give way after that period to newly elected members. So let me just clear it. The 10 members I have just explained you, in the Security Council there are 15 members, 5 are the permanent having the veto power, 10 are non-permanent member, and these non-permanent members are elected for a 2-year term, and then after the completion of their term other members or the next members would be elected. Or a country can do you know the country can be elected re-elected or not? So the answer is no. If a country have already served as a non-permanent member in the Security Council, then it cannot be re-elected immediately after completing a term of 2 years. मतलब after a gap of 2 years the country can be re-elected, but immediately, for example, you have just completed your tenure of 2 years, you cannot be re-elected immediately. You have to wait for the next 2 years. The non-permanent member are elected in a manner so that they represent all continents of the world. So these 10 members are elected on the basis of the representation, right? That means all the countries of the world should be equally represented. Most importantly, the non-permanent member do not have the veto power. That is the only problem. Everyone is crying for this veto power only. Okay, so in taking decision, the Security Council proceeds by voting. Definitely, Security Council, all the major decisions will be taken by this voting. All members will have one vote. However, the permanent members can vote in a negative manner. So this is the concept of veto power. I have just explained you. For example, if you don't want a bill to be passed, then these 5 permanent members can actually vote in a negative sense. They would say, no, this bill is not okay and you cannot pass it. So if single country from these 5 permanent members would say no, then the bill would not be passed. That decision will not be taken. So that is the power of the veto, right? Okay, so any permanent member negative vote can stall the decision, right? So it can stall the entire decision. The negative vote is the veto. I have explained. While there have been a move to abolish or modify the veto system, there is also a realization that the permanent members are unlikely to agree to such a reform. So I have explained you that these countries were saying कि भाई remove this entire concept of veto power, due to which there has been so much conflict. But every country has realized that these permanent members which already have the veto power, they are unlikely to agree. Definitely the country who is at a privilege, why would it agree to bring such reforms? Also, the world may not be ready for such a radical step even though the Cold War is over. course, the country is not ready for such a drastic change. Without the veto, there is a danger, as in 1945, that the great powers would lose interest in the world body. If we will snatch the veto power from these big countries, they would, they would be not interested in having a particular alliance with the entire world. They would not consider them to be a part of the world. They will just focus on their own country, and then again a situation like World War II can arise. So, and that without their support and involvement, the body would be ineffective. Definitely, without countries like USA and UK, that essence of United Nations, that effectiveness of United Nations would be completely lost. So that is why it is important to please these permanent members by giving them veto power. What we can currently do is that we can add on few members in the permanent member list, but again that is a matter of concern, like on what basis this membership would be granted. So that is the issue. Okay, but as of now it is clearly visible that this veto power will gonna sustain in the near future. Okay, because without this veto power, these big countries would be no longer interested in being a member of the United Nations. So this veto power is very important to please these countries and make them stay in the United Nations. I hope the topic was clear to you. Thank you so much for watching.